Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today on the Kristen Weardon Show. I'm your host, Kristen Weardon, and today we have a great guest. I love all of our guests, and this guest too is just fascinating. His story is everything you could, imagine in a story. His name is Nathan Holmes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nathan.
Thank you for having me here.
So we've known each other for a little while.
Been a few years.
It's
yeah.
been a hot minute, right? And I've always been fascinated with every time I talk to you or read something about you, I learn something new. Because we've known each other for, I want to say, close to 17 years, 20 years maybe.
It's close to 20.
Close to 20.
Yeah.
And there's still so many facets of your life that are unraveling or that I'm learning about. Starting with you were adopted.
Yes.
At a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So your story, it has some twists and turns. Share that with us.
So I didn't know, obviously, when I was very, very young that I was adopted, but it was never, hidden from me. When we kind of delved into it, there's only so much information that you can get prior to being of a certain age. And we knew that she was a single mom and was no longer with the father and wanted her child to be raised by a two-parent Protestant home. And so my parents, who had tried to have kids for many years, had decided adoption would be the way to go. And much more rapidly than they expected. It was, oh, by the way, we have the perfect child. And they're like, oh, okay. And so immediately they had to come up with names, and that was a whole other story in itself. And they were, the reality is probably the best parents I could have ever been blessed to have. So
Wow.
I was very grateful for that.
So you were adopted when you were born then? You were
About 4 months.
4 months, okay. Because I know some people that have adopted when they're older. So you, right out the gate, these were your parents.
Yes.
They were the only people you knew. Now, have you ever met your biological?
I have not. When I was younger and in the difficult years, of course, you're acting out and you want, I need to find this person because of all these reasons. But then once I hit a little older age, it wasn't as much of a drive. My biological mother was a single mother who was no longer with the father, who wanted her son to be raised in a two-parent Protestant home. And so she had known she was going to enter into the adoption process. The parents who did adopt me, who adopted me about 4 months old, I was very young, had tried to have kids for many years and had been unsuccessful. So they entered into that process, and it all happened to coincide at very quick times because they were told, you're going to be, estimate 6 months to a year till we find the right, child to fit this. And all of a sudden, within a very short period of time, they're like, oh, by the way, we have the perfect kid. And so scrambled to come up with names, all those things. So it was a great process. And
so you have or have not met your birth mother?
I have not. It was something that when I was younger, and I knew fairly on at an early age, but it was like, it didn't matter. And then as I got older and had, the trials and tribulations of a teenage years, you want to know, you want to reach out because there's something different. And then, later on, it was just kind of letting sleeping dogs lie. I think the closest I came is now that we all have these like 23andMe and all these different things, there have been things that have started popping up, which are biological relations that, I have started kind of some conversations, and that may lead to finding that person at some point, but it hasn't been a driving force for me.
I find it interesting when I talk to people who've been adopted. Some people feel a void, and some people have made peace with it. And then some people are very neutral about it. It's like, that's who I am, and it is.
It's an interesting point, and I've met people on both sides as well with that. For me, especially growing up, these were my only parents that I knew, and there was never once that I felt that I wasn't their child. Even when my parents gave birth, she got, as is typical of people when they get happy and things are going well, then she got pregnant. And so my brother was born, a biological child to them 3 years later, but there was never a feeling that I was treated differently than he was. There was the older child syndrome where you're feeling like the younger person is getting more attention, but I think that's typical in all families. So.
Oh yeah, the dynamics are there.
Yeah.
I knew that from even with my sister being 13 years younger than me. I'm like, hello, I didn't get that when I was that age.
100%. Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yep.
Yeah, the dynamics of family are just the dynamics.
Yep.
So when as you were growing up, I read your bio, and like I said, I've known you for years, and I know some of your story, but I didn't know other parts of your story. But so when you were growing up, you ran into some like youth problems, I guess we could call it.
Yeah, so I was a very difficult child, and I would act out a lot at different times, whether it was angry, yelling, different things or whatever. But it wasn't like normal. What would be a normal degree of acting out compared to the situations? And so when it started happening very regularly, my parents started working with counselors and therapists, psychologists, and everything to try to get to the bottom of it. Um, it wasn't until I was around 12, 11 and 12, somewhere in there, that I was part of a biological trait disorder study at the University of Minnesota, where they went through and determined that due to a biological trait disorder, I was exhibiting manic depressive tendencies and things like that, which kind of put a clarity on the situation of why it was so difficult for me as a child to maintain kind of a level keel.
Do you think that helped you as a child to understand that? Only because nowadays these, there's things that people are coming up with these diagnoses, and I'm not, taking away from
Right.
any of them, because for some people it gives clarity. For other people, it's a like they're embarrassed by it.
There's a third side of that, which is when you're an intelligent kid who now can blame everything you do wrong. Oh, that's just because of this, whatever. So it becomes this thing that, oh, it's just him. That's just, I can't control it. I can't control it. So there's an element where, and the people around you have that same thing. Oh, he's just doing it because he has this. He's just doing it because he has this. So you get away with all of these things.
Oh.
And it never, it took me, and you see in the bio, it took me till well into my 30s where when I finally gained the perspective of owning all of my actions and taking responsibility for everything, no matter where I was in a mood cycle swing, is when I, one, found peace, but also found the ability of how to navigate that and use it to be successful in life.
See, this is why I thought it was so important for us to have a conversation and interview you, because like I said, I've known some of your trials and tribulations and your ups and downs and the resilience. And then you're talking about the responsibility and the resilience. Plus, you're super smart.
Thank you.
So you put all those things together, and there's such a story there. And now to learn that this story started way before, but how it brought you to so many realizations even later on.
It did, and I think it was having that diagnosis was very effective later on when I started doing things, and when I was trying to really find stability in life. What you don't realize is when people talk about that, they think, okay, you go up, you go down, you go up, you go down. But for me, my downs would always be, more. So that 3-year, I talked about it, I have these 3-year cycle of destruction. That's because I would go manic, depressed, and it would keep dropping down lower and lower until even a manic phase is still in a depression. It's just less depression. And so you have all these destructive things that happen, and then that would take about 3 years. And then I would move on. Hey, manic, everything new. And it was this cycle. And again, once I found that responsibility in that, then I was able to, navigate that.
Yeah, I think it's very important for people to hear these things because, again, we have all different, like ADHD is now become neurodivergent, which I think is better, at least for people like my son who were diagnosed that way, but weren't, like he didn't have a lot of the things that were ADHD, highly intelligent. And now that he's older, having that diagnosis, it just doesn't make sense because he's navigated so many of the difficulties and found ways to work with them.
Right.
And incorporate how to work with them in his life, that it's not even a diagnosis. But when you say neurodivergent, he's like, oh yeah, sometimes my brain is just different.
Right.
My brain just doesn't work as others.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't say that because he's 21 and everything's fine. I say that when I want to get mad at him. Like, why is he doing this right now?
Well, and what's interesting is so like the diagnoses are there, and when I was early diagnosed, they put me on medications, and the medications are designed to boxcar those emotions in, so your highs aren't as high, your lows aren't as low, and they work. But I was one of those kids, I didn't want to be controlled by anyone or anything.
Yeah.
So whenever I had a chance, I took myself off the medications. I can do this. But it was that, again, it was all about responsibility. Instead of looking at that as a tool to be able to be successful, I was looking at it as, oh, no, it's controlling me, it's changing me. And it was all about perspective. And I think that's the hard thing is coming to grips being self-secure enough to be okay that says, yes, this is me. I'm a little different than somebody else, but it's still me, and I can accept and be good with that.
Yeah, yeah. I think the acceptance has a lot to do with people kind of moving on into their full life and living a full life. But not being on the medications created such problems that you left, you were asked to leave home or you were placed out of your home, I believe.
So,
How do I gently put this?
well, there's no judgment. I got to the point where I was getting violent and threatened my mother and ran away from home. And so
Okay.
my father, being a good father and wanting to protect, his wife and family and everything, they uh, initially put me into a shelter away from home and everything. You have to remand custody to the state.
Mm.
So the state of Minnesota got custody of me. And it was the move he had to do for the family, which was fine. But then, yeah, there was a period I went from a shelter to a psych ward to another shelter to another psychiatric ward to on run to being in juvenile detention center for a while, then being in another psychiatric ward before in residential treatment. It was just a progressive path because I kept being destructive in each of those different areas.
Right, right. Now, how do you feel like that has impacted you looking back on it, having the perspective of looking back?
I think one, a lot of the tools that they give you and they use when you're in, psychiatric care or different things like that, when you're trying to actually work through things, are things that can apply throughout your entire life. And having learned them at a young age, not that I actually applied them well then, but when you're in a fixed environment and all you can do is do that. Again, being an intelligent kid, I'm going to prove to them there's nothing wrong with me. So I'm going to dive into all their things and just be the perfect kid, which when you've got mood swings, you can do pretty easily. So there was many times where like, we don't know why he's here because you're playing games. So, but those tools that they use, and it's more of a focus on understanding yourself that I think is what I've kept with me throughout my life is I'm very intentional about being better tomorrow than I was today in varying aspects. It's not every aspect every time, but it's definitely, that is my goal every day, is to be better tomorrow than I was today.
That's a great perspective to have looking back because I think some people could be bitter about having gone through those experiences and it can really carry that on their shoulders and into situations. But you have never, in all the years I've been around you and talked to you, you've never come off that way with any animosity even towards it.
No, I'm glad. I mean, I think I had guilt for a long time for what I put my parents through, and was able to then work through that with them. I mean, by the time I was 13, I was in the treatment center and then foster care and those things. I mean, there were periods when they would visit and I would just glare at them, wouldn't say a word, different things, because I was this angry kid, and I put them through a lot. And once I became 18 and was out on my own and then having to learn how to make friends with my parents again to then grow back to the point we were with a family, it was an intentional choice by me, and they were very embracing of it, and my parents were wonderful, and it was great to be able to build the relationship that I had with both of them until they passed,
So this is also a good information for people to understand. It doesn't matter what the relationship was.
Oh, no.
If both parties want to work towards a resolution, I mean, you're talking about being removed or asked basically to leave your home for reasons of your own doing, which you recognize, but there could still be anger, animosity, or them having resentment towards putting them through. But both of you said, hey, we're going to work on this together.
Oh yeah, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't like, hey, we're all back, we're good to go.
Yeah.
This was years in the making, and ultimately, I think what it took, on both sides was being able to forgive yourself for what you've done, and then be able to forgive them, or even, embrace them for, or on both sides, embrace either side for what they've done that allowed us to be as close as we were.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to just accept each other, warts and all, for the warts of the past, so to speak.
Oh yeah, the past is the past. We can't change it. All we can change is tomorrow once we learn how to accept today.
Yeah, I think that's a great philosophy, and I think it's very helpful for people to hear that. I know I see so many people in my coaching that you struggle as a coach to try to sometimes get them to see if they just accept, it's so much easier to move on.
Oh yeah.
If it's like divorced couples, it doesn't matter what it is. If you can accept what happened and like, that was kind of my fault. Oh my gosh.
Right.
what am I going to do now? I can't, burn myself in hell all the time for it, or say, I can do better. Let me work on that. You can focus forward. I think it's a powerful lesson that is hard for people, though.
It is. It is. I think people, myself at different times, we carry regret, we carry guilt, we carry all these different things. But ultimately, for me, I think what it comes down to is I can't change what happened. Knowing I can't change it means I can either try to believe that it didn't happen, but it did, or I can just come to acceptance, it did.
Yeah.
Not be proud of that, but I can say that I'm proud of who I am today and move forward in a better way.
Now, in your bio, you talk about you had a counselor who was really pivotal in some of your life during that time. How was that? How did that impact you?
It was interesting. Jan was my primary counselor in residential treatment, and when I had, improved enough in the program that they were looking at putting me into foster care, no foster homes would take me because I'd been too violent. And knowing that, and she put herself up to take me in. And that was something I didn't appreciate enough when I was a child. And looking back, I have such admiration for, what she did, what she brought into her life, because even, I was still a difficult child in certain ways, so I wasn't as violent, but I was still not an easy kid.
Sounds like you had a level of respect, though.
Oh, yeah.
For that person in your life, and whether you consciously knew it, maybe innately or subconsciously knew that they were like, well, they're kind of trying to help me, so maybe I shouldn't be as big of an ass as I could be.
I don't think it was that. I think when I was being an ass, I didn't recognize it.
Okay.
But I think the fact of her seeing me at my lowest when I was in there, and then my cheerleader as I was getting better in different things and all those things, this was somebody that I could attach myself to who was wanting me to be better and help me and do these things, because she had proven it over my years in that facility. So.
Okay. Now, when did you take up the fencing?
When I was 15, living with Jan, one of my best friends had said, hey, going down to a fencing salon in Minneapolis, do you want to come? I'm like, heck yeah, let's do this. And loved it. And so we, would go fencing a couple times a week, and, eventually started competing and all those things. And so until I was 18, so for, 2.5 years in high school, I did it. And then really enjoyed it. Wasn't that good, but, enjoyed it and did it. And then throughout my years until probably right around early 2000s, I was in and out of, depending on where I was living and different things. And it was kind of the one escape I had from the other things in life that was there. So I really enjoyed it.
Do you find that the discipline of it or the focus of it might have helped you in your manic and bipolar moments because it's such focus required?
Part of it was that, but part of it was getting the arrogance knocked out of you. You have these things where, you're on the fencing strip and you're going to go do these things and you have these plans, and it doesn't matter how much you do them. Somebody who is better than you is just going to cut right through all of that, and you're going to lose. And when you start realizing that, you have to be calculated and not arrogant, because when you're arrogant, you're like a bull in a china shop. You're just going to go. But you have to, it's literally tag with 3 feet of steel, and it's a chess game of inches. And if you gauge an inch wrong, you just lost. So you had to be very collected. But I didn't view it from the standpoint of martial art like it was. It was more of, when I was arrogant, I lost. So I had to knock that out of myself to be able to compete.
So it's almost like you had to control your feelings.
100%.
In order to, hey, I want to succeed at this.
Yes.
Wow, what a lesson.
It was crazy. And then you'd find, like, you start, I remember there was one match, the Sunshine State Games, probably in 2001, 2002, was doing really well. And I went up against a fencer that I was 100% confident I was going to do this. And he destroyed me and knocked me out of the games.
Wow.
And it was so just, And you think back afterwards and you realize, no, I got cocky. And I didn't follow the game plan that had got me to that place. I was just excited to be at that level and lost my focus.
Yeah, I was just about to say, lost your focus, lost sight of
100%.
And that kind of applies to life, really.
Yep.
I mean, life, business, relationships. I think it's really all-encompassing what you just said when you have that.
That's true.
Wow. This is so. For those of you who don't know, there's so many facets to Nathan that we're just pulling out little bits and pieces as we go along. because next you also have been involved in music. Now, when did that start in your life?
Same time, and when I was in high school, I was, had friends. Again, same guy I was fencing with was the drummer, and so we were in bands together, and I sang, and we had other friends that we'd perform around in different things, and I've always gravitated towards people in the music industry. So throughout, even though I haven't performed in decades now, it's been a facet of my life, and most of the
Yeah.
people in my life are either successful or semi-successful musicians, and it's just there's a vibe
I'm
that
always fascinated by the people that you know in music. I just randomly will go through. I mean, for years now. It's not just a recent thing. It's not just a then thing. It's a since I've known you thing. Just scrolls through social media and like, where is he backstage now?
I've been blessed to have a lot of really, really cool experiences from the people around in that industry and things. Yeah. So
How do you feel that music impacted your bipolar disorder diagnosis and the focus? And how did music play in that? Because fencing seemed to bring you emotionally into a space.
I think it's kind of the release of, I would maybe creative sides. I always gravitated towards heavier music, harder music. That was the stuff that I could go to sleep to, type of a thing, which is reality. That's a Ritalin type of a thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Ritalin overstimulates, you go to sleep. I so used
Yeah.
heavy music for those things. Um, for me, the creative outlet of either writing songs, singing them, different things like that it's in a way it's bearing yourself and being vulnerable in a way to not you're not being vulnerable to people so much as you're being vulnerable to yourself and letting it out. And then there's double edge to that. If people like what you do, it's great. If they don't, it's devastating. But it's still it's a pushing yourself in a new way, I think.
I like the creative part. I find that people who have their brain works differently, that creativity is a really it helps in the business aspect too,
Mhm.
because you all of a sudden your brain goes, oh, I can do it this way, and then when you're at work, you're like, oh, I can do it this way, and everybody else is like, where did that come from?
And I think there's both sides of that. I think you've got a lot of musicians that are very trained and clinical and do very, very well and end up being a lot of the good studio musicians because they can play anything because they know it. And then you've got the real artistic musicians, which are, coming at it from all these other different angles and are very unfocused, so to say, to be able to create that. So I think there's both sides of it in the industry. I think, which is one of the things I like about it. It's kind of chaos and clarity all combined.
It is. That's a great way to put it. Chaos and clarity. So you got a job when you've had a few jobs, I think. I
There's
read
been a few.
you've had a few, but each of them had a lesson, it almost seems, in it, or it showed you something, when I was talking to the guys earlier, I said it seems like every time you're at a job, if it was something that didn't work out or it became a setback, it also became a stepping stone. And it sounds like that first job at UPS was kind of like the beginning of this. I'm here, but this happened, but then I ended up over here.
Yeah, that wasn't the first. I mean, there was definitely ones before that, in high school and different things. But I again, that philosophy of being better tomorrow than we were today is I do a lot of introspection. If that particular job was devastating when I lost that because I had not been familiar with company politics at a level of UPS and different things. And again, that cocky kid, got somebody in trouble, which then made them look bad. So I was summarily discharged very close after that.
Right.
And then it was a while before I got back on my feet because that led me to being homeless in LA and I went from there to selling perfume door to door. I've sold perfume door to door in Compton before. I'm a white guy who's gone down the street and done that, and that was great for learning how to talk to people
I
and
am
different
not
things.
surprised.
But I did that, and so it ended up, like I said, homeless for a while, and then moving to Kansas and getting the jobs there and growing, then back to Minnesota. There was period of about 3 years there where there were jobs, but it wasn't necessarily advancement. And then once in Florida, once I entered this industry, that was really where from there I think most things have been a how do we move up from here type of
Okay.
a path.
So those, would you call those your growing years?
I would definitely call it the unfocused early 20s. It was
Some people have that.
yeah, it was more important. It was like almost the college years where you're not really doing college work, you're just partying, and I was really just making enough to pay bills and partying.
Bill paying years where you're
Yes,
just no real rhyme or reason to it.
100%.
I think a lot of people go through that. I know some 20-year-olds and some 50-year-olds who've gone through that, and some just don't leave it.
You're right, and I think it's important that you do it when you're younger. I think you have to find your voice in life, and without trying things, you don't know what it is that you like, what it is that you do. It's why we don't, typically we date one person and marry them, and that's the rest of our life. Most people don't. They're going to date different people and find out what they like. Going out with friends, learning what you do like to do, learning your limits, learning not to do those things. When we're younger, the detriment to the life is much more minimalized. As we get older, those type of behaviors can, devastate things that we've worked for years to build. So it's, yeah, I think it's good to do it when you're younger.
Get it out of your system. Kind of
Absolutely.
thing.
Yes.
Get it out of your system. So did you start your first business when you came to Florida? Or was that
Sure.
before you came here?
No, it was shortly after. So it was, so I came to Florida in 95 and I started Acoustic Accents in 99.
That's what it was, Acoustic Accents.
Yeah, so I had worked, there was 3 positions prior to that, including designer audio.
Yeah.
And then when I left that, I started Acoustic Accents up in Fort Myers. Yeah.
Okay. And so that was your first foray into the entrepreneurial world.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you weren't making a paycheck from somebody else. You had to figure it out now.
And I was that guy who, again, bullheaded, I was good at doing my job, and I knew I could, when I landed a contract that was a labor contract only, I knew we'd be able to get that done. So I left and I started my business with about $600 in the bank. And within 2 weeks, I had 6 employees, and actually 4, and it grew to 6. And I completely miscalculated how long it was going to take to train people. I miscalculated a whole bunches of things,
Yeah.
but I managed to get enough sales and different things to sustain it going into year 2. And we had done well, but the reality is what I thought was well is had literally just survived. And as we were going into, I knew about past 18 months we were going to start running out of business from the customers, and we weren't getting the sales and things we needed. And so I did, we're doing great. Let me go talk to my clients who I've had, who are all successful businessmen and different things. And repeatedly I got, nope, it's going to fail. You have to scale it back. You have to do this, if you want to succeed, blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't ready to do that because I knew people who had left stable jobs to come work for me. They'd given this to me and I really wanted to take care of them. So I ended up selling the company to one of my former employers for the sum total of the debt so that I can ensure that the team retained their jobs. Yeah. But it was great. I learned a lot of things not to do.
Well, I think sometimes when people start that first business, and we're not talking like you had worked in companies, you had been part of different companies, but when you go out on your own, there's such a big learning curve.
Yeah.
And I think, I want to say like 90% of the people probably underestimate or overestimate something, and then that break point happens. Mm-hmm. I know that there's a lot of companies, a lot of talk nowadays about different business break points, and I really do feel like that 18-month to 2-year mark, it can make or break a business.
I agree. Yeah.
And so it sounds like you carried a lot of that knowledge just in that. When you think about it, 18 months and 2 years, it's not that long.
Nope.
It probably felt like an eternity when
Yes.
when you're in it and you're grinding every day. You're like, oh my
You're doing
God.
everything you can to make sure payroll is met. You're not pissing. I might have missed paying myself sometimes, but I never miss paying the team,
Right.
different things. So yeah.
So it seems like, but then looking back, you're like, wow, that was just a blip on the radar screen, but the lesson is they last forever.
Yep.
So again, this is going back to the different, so many facets of your experiences and where they've brought you. Like, again, well, it didn't go so great, but at least I got out from underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went to?
So I ran it for the company that had purchased it for a while, and we just weren't seeing, eye to eye on where things were. So then I actually went to work for a manufacturer as a regional sales manager for the state of Florida, and sold their products around, and I did well. I mean, I had 100% of my dealers increased in their sales. So
Same industry?
Same industry. It was a company called Crestron.
Okay.
So I was a regional sales manager, and then as you saw in the bio, that went south. And I learned a lesson there as to conflict of interest and things like
I
that.
remember those years.
Yes.
I remember those years.
Yep.
Funny story. I was just in a house not that long ago. One of the builders here let me borrow a house for a photo shoot.
Hmm.
And so he said, yes, when you want to go leave, he said, you can just press the all off button on the system. And I go, oh, what system is that? And he goes, it's a Crestron system. And I instantly thought, oh, I remember Nathan, we used to work for Crestron.
Yep. My company was a top 10 Crestron dealer in the state of Florida.
Yeah, you were a big deal there in that industry, and in that company, in the industry. You couldn't go to a CEDIA show without hearing your name associated with Crestron during those years,
That's cool.
and even after.
It's mainly networking nowadays, but yeah, that's cool to know. Yeah, I mean, it's a great product line, and I've been, I still work in my current job. We work hand in hand with them from building our networks to ensure that they work optimally. So
Yeah, I think that's an interesting connection to then and now. Huh.
it's been a fun path. Yeah, it's and CEDIA kind of tied it all together. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. For those who don't know, explain what CEDIA is.
So CEDIA is the trade organization for companies that install electronics and electronic. What's the best way to put this? All of the gadgets and the toys and everything that we put in our house that are, somewhat easy to install and somewhat not. So from lighting control to security systems to home theaters to all those things. The companies that will put those in your homes, they have a trade organization, the Custom Electronics Dealers Industry Association, CEDIA. And I've been teaching for them for 20 years. Yeah. Taught project management for a decade, taught, networking since then, chair of the technical education working group for a while, wrote the white paper on Wi-Fi 6, different things like that. So it's this wonderful organization that supports the dealers because there's so much knowledge in so many different facets, from the Crestron control systems to security cameras to how do you effectively make a house so when a customer comes in they don't have 30 light switches on the wall, but they also don't have a keypad that's so confusing they can't understand it. So how do you help the people that are going to put that in to help the ultimate customers understand that? And that's really what we do.
Yeah, the integration and automation of it all, what gets me is everybody there is so darn smart. I mean,
Yes.
I just like gadgets.
Mhm.
I'm a gadget person, and so the time that I think I've been twice in my life, but you walk around and you're just like, wow.
Yeah.
If you like gadgets, it's definitely a gadget place, or where everybody who sells to people who like gadgets needs to go to learn stuff, and it's a whole nother world. It's like Mars for integration toys.
It really, there's so many things. I mean, if you can imagine it, it can be done. And we've done some, I've been involved in some wonderfully, intricate, things to do. And it's funny. It's an industry that's based on nothing you need. We don't need any of this. But how do we improve our lives? How do we make it better? How do I, when I get out of my car and I walk up to the house, I have it automatically unlock the door, unlock the mag locks, turn the lights on, set my music, different things like that.
Yeah.
Those type of experiences, we don't need them, but it definitely makes our lives more enjoyable. So those are the kind of things that if you can imagine it, we can make it happen.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me. And in this environment nowadays, I think also it's just become a part of everyday homes.
Sure.
The integration stuff, for sure.
Well, and that's the different. There's two sides to it. The industry kind of bifurcated about a decade ago from technology integrators to technology facilitators. So there's a lot of things out there that we could all buy and configure ourselves. But most people don't want to spend the time to do it or figure it out. Or even though this smart guy says it's really easy, for most people, like, no, this isn't really easy.
That's me.
So there's a whole lot of companies out there that will install all of these separate ecosystem type of devices for you, and they work. And those are what I call technology facilitators. They're facilitating the technology for you. The integrators take it up another level. Instead of having different ecosystems, how do I combine everything into one ecosystem for you so you've got a unified approach to all of it? And that takes different products, different approach, and a different understanding. They're both sides of the same industry. One of the things in the industry that I gravitated to is there's not a point where it ever becomes mundane and repetitive because there's so many aspects. And from somebody like me who has all these variances, I think, yes, my life has been a series of things that I integrate. And so I like that. That's actually a really cool analogy.
You're welcome. So I want to say to all of you out there, we are going to make this a part 2. So stay tuned. Join us on the next episode of the Kristen Weardon Show, where we continue to talk to Nathan because the story gets even more fascinating and more multifaceted. And we're going to learn how Nathan integrated all of this into where he is now. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we will see you on the next episode, part 2 with Nathan Holmes, on the next episode of the Kristen Weardon Show. Thank you so much for joining us.